Hello everyone, my name is Robert Pratton, and this is a presentation I was due to give to the Sacramento Film Festival, but I'm being held hostage in the UK thanks to a volcanic cloud of ash that is covering most of Europe, and so I've had to give this presentation in exile. So just a little bit about me. I'm a feature filmmaker and have been for the last 10 years. My first feature film was called London Voodoo, that came out in 2004. My second was called Mindflesh, and that came out in 2008, 2009. And in between, I edited an anthology of short stories called Love and Sacrifice. So regards to the presentation, I've grouped it into 4 areas. Firstly, really just to describe what transmedia is, or what it is to me and independent filmmakers. Part 2 is asking independent filmmakers to change the way they think about entertainment and the way they look at opportunities that might be present for the future. And in part 3, it's much more practical, look at a process for moving into transmedia. And then finally, I'm going to look at an example of an independent filmmaker that's looking at transmedia and implementing a lot of these ideas. So this is part 1. What is transmedia storytelling? Well, it's storytelling over multiple media. There are lots of more complicated definitions, and I'm going to go in to explain some of the nuances of transmedia as I go through. But in terms of just having a single idea on which to sort of base your understanding, it's really just telling a story, doing it well, and doing it across multiple media. So I've grouped together some examples here. Mass Effect 2 is a popular computer game. What the creators decided to do for the sequel to Mass Effect was to release a comic book. And what the comic book does is it expands a part of the game story right at the beginning, where our protagonist has gone missing. So if you look at the Dark Horse website, what they say is that the comic book is an integral part of the Mass Effect universe, and in fact it is. You don't need to read the comic in order to play the game, but if you do read the comic, then you get additional insights into a period that's dealt with very briefly in the game. CATHY'S book is another example of transmedia storytelling, and quite different from the Mass Effect example. Here you've got what might be considered to be a book, but then inside and on the cover there are telephone numbers and website URLs, and you can telephone the numbers, you can visit the websites and so on. And I saw recently that there's also an iPhone app now for this book, where you can actually ring the characters from within the application, obviously because you're on a phone, and they've built in all kinds of other interactivity which goes with the platform. So it is a book, but not as we know it, Jim. And then the final example here is Level 26. Level 26 is a book, I would say, first and foremost, but within it there are these what the creators call video bridges. So after you've read maybe 3 or 4 chapters, then you watch a video clip which bridges between, let's say, chapter 3 and chapter 4, or between 4 and 5. So how do these examples of storytelling over multiple media differ from what people might commonly call a media franchise? So I've got these 2 sort of diagrams here. In the media franchise, what typically tends to happen is that the same story is repackaged over and over again. And if you're a fan, or you don't even have to be a fan, you just have to be a regular consumer, you buy these different sort of franchise elements, and what you find is that the experience can become increasingly less rewarding, because you're basically getting the same information over and over again. Now with the transmedia entertainment, the idea is that each piece stands alone, but if you consume all of the media elements, then the satisfaction is greater than the sum of all the parts. So there's a big incentive to want to buy or engage with all the different media. Okay, so just to illustrate the point about how this media ought to sort of fit snugly together, this is a project I'm working on right now with a writer called Simon Wood. It's called Lowlifes, and we'll have a novella, a web series, and a blog. And each media really puts a different character into the spotlight. So the overall story is about a homicide detective called Larry Hayes, and his story, from his sort of first-person point of view, is told in novella. Now, he has an ex-wife who is fighting for custody of their 12-year-old daughter, and her kind of rants and her perspective on Hayes is told through her blog, and she's hired a private detective, Lauren Ortega, and her story is told through a web series. Now, if you only read the blog or only watch the web series, you're going to get, you know, sufficient entertainment to feel like, yeah, that was satisfying. But if you consume all of them, then you know, the objective is that the reward will be much greater than only having consumed one, and in fact much greater than the sum of each of the individual parts, because of the way that the plot and the characters are all interwoven between the three different media. So with this slide, I just wanted to say a little bit about where I think transmedia is right now, and you know, what I think we can, where I think we can see improvements as sort of time moves on. I think many of the transmedia examples today are kind of experimental in the fact that they try so hard to work across all these different platforms that they kind of exclude a lot of people, actually. And I've got that quote there about, you know, too much friction for too little entertainment. There's a lot of effort required often in trying to navigate these new ways of storytelling. And while some people get excited about this, I think that a lot of people are turned off. They're just as happy to sit down and read a book or to go online and play a computer game. But when they're expected to kind of jump between all these different media, it's not always done in a very elegant way, and it's not always done in a rewarding way. The kind of the benefit for having jumped between media, for having gone from sitting back to now sitting forward, doesn't always pay off. And I look at the current situation a little bit like the early days of any technology. I mean, when desktop publishing first came out, just because you could use 1,000 fonts on a single page didn't mean that you should. But you saw a lot of these horrible kind of desktop published newsletters, and I think over time people eased off. They realised that there was a you know, the technology was available, but they decided that less was more. And I think we might see that with transmedia. It's a little bit like electronic music is another example. When synthesizers first came out, people tried to twist synth music, electronic music, into all kinds of different genres, and it didn't always fit very well. We had a lot of plinky plonky kind of music, and now we see a much more kind of balanced approach to the way synthesizers are used in sort of music. And the final bugbear that I have is quite often there's just so much endless detail that's masquerading as story. There isn't, you know, quite often people say, well, I want to build out my world around you know, around a central kind of plot line or something, but it's not building out in terms of additional subplots or different interesting characters. It tends to be just detail, often sort of backstory. And I appreciate that fans may like all this kind of additional information, but if you're an independent content creator, let's be honest, you don't have any fans yet. And so to sort of start going down this route of preparing all this detail, I think is a little bit kind of, well, it's just time consuming, and I don't think it's putting your effort into the best area. So just to summarise two key thoughts about what I think leads to better transmedia experiences, and that's this idea that it's emotion which leads to immersion. People talk about immersive engagement and being immersed in the world, but that being immersed in the world doesn't mean being surrounded by tedious detail. At least that's what I think. I think a good story in a good story, you are immersed in the world. There are many books that I've read where I feel completely immersed. I can picture the environment and the characters and everything, and that's without any kind of digital storytelling. And what I don't want us to do is to start going down this kind of techno fetish route for being obsessed with telling a story across different media. If it means that we're going to move further away from the emotional side of storytelling. And so it's really getting back to what is this story about, and why will people be affected by this story. And this other thing here I stole from Chris Crawford, the idea that it's choices, not things, that should populate our world. So that's the character making decisions, and it's also about us as experiencing the transmedia entertainment, that we should be given sort of choices. We should feel that we're kind of in there with the protagonist and actually making a difference to the way that this story might develop, or the way that we experience that, rather than just feeling that we're collecting lots of stuff for the sake of being able to trump somebody else who's collected less stuff. Okay, so in this second part, I'd like to appeal to filmmakers to think outside the film and try to imagine a different landscape, one that isn't just single media, but one in which entertainment is across multiple media. And the reason I believe that this is going to be become increasingly more common is because audiences are already expecting online components and now a mobile component to the movies that they watch. And in the TV industry, it's been going on for quite some time now that audiences are being driven or called to go visit the website after the show finishes, and they're trying to get people to engage with each other in addition to just engaging with the content. And I think if filmmakers ignore what's happening around them and they only see as far as the film, they're going to be at a disadvantage. But there's more reasons for thinking about transmedia, and that is because the old way of doing things is dying. I mean, there's been an explosion of content. There's also been an explosion of, let's say, piracy. And so we need to look at new ways for people to connect with the creative sort of energy that we have. And the film is still a good sort of medium, but I think it's increasingly going to be isolated, and it needs to be kind of grouped up with other different media in order to increase what I put it, multiple audience touch points, in order to reach into people's lifestyle and try to get them to look at you at a time and a place when it's convenient for them, and then use that kind of satellite media to draw them into your movie if you want to see a movie as the core sort of thing you do. And I really think that this is an opportunity to outflank Hollywood. Although we see a lot of big examples now, like Avatar and so on, that are kind of burning a path for this, telling a story outside of the movie and in other different areas. But it's quite difficult for these big companies to coordinate everything internally, and to get the comic book group to talk to the movie group, to talk to the merchandising group. It's very difficult for them to do. And so it's a good opportunity for independents to really show how it should be done, and allow Hollywood to kind of create the market for us, but for us to really come in and make some good business out of the way that things are going. I don't want you to, moving on to this other side about the transmedia DAO, I think there are many filmmakers who look negatively at marketing, and there are also those who look negatively at transmedia as though it is only marketing. But if you look at, firstly, there's a difference between marketing and advertising, which I'll come on to in a moment. But the other thing is, because often people are talking about advertising, are calling it marketing, but what they really mean is advertising. And the other thing is, if you look at the advertising industry, they're moving toward, they realise that lots of people don't like advertising. And so they're moving to these sort of content models where what they produce is actually engaging and entertaining, and it doesn't look like what we thought was advertising before. And what I'm saying is you shouldn't look at your project as entertainment with some bolt-on advertising. You should look at it as advertising and marketing completely baked in together, and it's integral to the whole project. So there is no divide between entertainment and marketing, because marketing is about connecting with audiences. It's about understanding what, if you're looking at a product sort of example, it's about understanding what consumers want, about the way they live their lives and how your product fits in with their life. Put the audience at the center of what it is that you're doing, and think about what it is they're already doing. They're already out there socializing with friends, they're out there playing games, they're out there contributing user-generated media to websites and so on. So why get them to try to do something different? Why not harness what the audience is already doing, what they're already enjoying, and show that what you want to deliver as entertainment fits in with their existing entertainment kind of habits, if you want to call it like that. So what I'm asking you to do as independent filmmakers is to adopt these kind of two Buddhist ideas about losing attachment and about walking a middle path. If I look at the attachments that many of us have, it's, think outside the feature film. There are many opportunities to express yourself creatively. It doesn't mean you have to all go off and become novelists. You can still make films, but does it have to be feature length? And so on and so forth. Just think about what it is you really want to say to the world, and what is the best way to say it. And when I say like lose ego, I don't mean the idea is that you're swanning around at these kind of showbiz parties, although obviously lots of people have that idea, but it's try to think of yourself differently. Don't become attached to the idea that you are a director. Think about that of yourself in a new transmedia world, and how you might perceive yourself there as a creator of entertaining content, perhaps. Don't worry about the past or the future. Don't worry that you might have spent a fortune going to film school and that you know how to use all these different cameras and so on. It's completely irrelevant. In a way, in the business world, you would call that a sunk cost. It's money that you've already spent, and you can't sort of leverage any of that to change what's happening now in the future. You shouldn't use that to base your future decisions. And also, I'm saying, don't worry about what the future might be in many years to come. Try to think about what's happening right now and what you can do right now with the resources that you have. And by resources, I mean the time you have available, the money you have available, the friends and their connections and your connections that you have to make content now. Some people sit around for years waiting for money to come in, kissing lots of people's arse, asking for money and so on, when in this current climate, with the technology that's available, you can just as well go out and start connecting with audiences and building some kind of online reputation for your creative genius, rather than just sitting around moaning that you're waiting for a script to be greenlit. Just go out and do it. And here, about losing the attachment to technology, I mean, there's so many people that are obsessed with the red camera or 3D. Most audiences do not have a single clue about what technology you shot the film on, and they really don't care. And I think there's nothing more irrelevant to filmmakers than all these fancy cameras that are coming out, apart from the idea that you might be able to do it cheaper. And you should think beyond this kind of technological kind of fetish for getting better and more clever cameras. Go back to the audience, go back to the storytelling, and that it really sort of feeds into the money. Don't worry about sitting around trying to make $1 million blockbusters. Those opportunities will come, I'm sure, but they're going to come in a different way now. It's not about it's not about maybe doing a feature film. You can do something else now to show that you're able to tell stories, and that will lead to new opportunities. And I've got this final thing here about walking the middle path. I think there are a lot of people who really embrace transmedia, and they really embrace social media and the way that things are going, and they embrace the fact, they embrace privacy, they embrace the fact that, you know, content that we do, once it's out there, it's out there. And I'm saying that the old ways weren't always, you know, not everything in the old days was bad. There were some very good things about the old days, and I think that not everything about the new way of thinking is good, and try to mix and match the things that work for you. And this sort of transmedia business model for independent filmmakers is something that I explain in detail on Culture Hacker, so I recommend that you go and read it there. But it is a mix of the old and the new. It's a balanced way to look at, if you want, getting your feature film funded, if that's what's an objective for you. But it's also a way to look at transmedia from the independence point of view, about not having to ask permission to create content, about not having to ask permission for people's money, to use what resources you have to make something now, to get it out there, to start collaborating and building a future together with an audience, and use that, leverage that success to raise finance in a traditional way, look at opportunities for sponsorship, to sell stuff to the audience. And so we see here a mix and match. And then, as you go through this, you can ask yourself, am I satisfied yet? And if you are, you can move on. And if you aren't, then just keep going through the loop. And I think you'll find that this is a much more productive way to be generating content, to getting yourself out there and gaining experience about what people like and what they don't like, what turns them on, turns them off, than just kind of working in a silo, which can happen as an independent filmmaker. And here are two examples I've put together of people that are looking at this new world differently. And here's a project called REKILL, which I asked you to look at, and it takes the premise of, you know, genetic engineering. What if all the world's notorious killers were kind of brought back to life, genetically re-engineered, and then we could go out and kill them again? And what these guys are doing is they're looking to get 1 million fans on Facebook. They're releasing a comic book, they're looking at sort of motion graphics and so on to build an audience around their idea, and it looks really cool. This type of thing wouldn't have been possible without the internet, without social media and so on. And so it's a good way to actually prove that you've got an audience for what you do, to find out what the audience like about the story, about the artwork and so on. It's a really excellent example of this new kind of transmedial business model. And here's another example, a game called Metro 2033. I didn't appreciate until recently that it had been a novel. It had been a Russian novel, self-published. And if you look on this following slide, there's a bit of a time scale here for what happened to this guy. Self-published a novel, gave it away for free, used that to build an audience, and over the course of 2 years managed to get more and more people engaged with his story, which then became a very successful selling book, and obviously now a very successful game. And so 2 years, when you're young, 2 years seems like an eternity, but it often takes 3-4 years to make a feature film, you know, from writing the script, bringing the cast and the crew together, getting the finance and so on. And so you shouldn't be put off by these sort of like long timescales, and look at it as a journey. Don't be so obsessed with the end result, but think of it as an entertaining, creative endeavour that is going to be a journey, basically, is what I'm saying. Okay, so this is part 3, the transmedia design process, and what I'm proposing is that when you look at developing a transmedia project, you look at these 5 key considerations, and rather than try to, you know, maximise any particular one, or try to maximise all 5 in one fell swoop, is that you take an iterative approach, that you start small and gradually kind of add complexity as you go through. And I appreciate that some people might might approach this differently, but it works for me to approach it from starting with the story as the first idea. So when you embark on this process, take the story and just look at the basics, the characters, the plot, the premise, themes, and so on. And then move on to look at the audience and think about who is it that's going to take to your story. And don't try not to think of the audience as one big kind of anonymous mass. Break up the audience into different segments and identify different kind of audience groups that will identify and relate to the material in different ways, maybe through the themes or through the characters or through the genres, and then go back to the story in the first iteration and look at how could I improve this story so that it really strikes a resonance with some of the audience groups that I've identified. Now, once you feel like you've got a bit of a handle on the story and who it's intended for, move on to step 3 and look at platforms. Now, by platforms, I'm talking about a combination of media plus the technology. So it might be a video is the media, but it's the way that the video is delivered to the audience, which combined creates what I'm terming a platform. So, for example, YouTube and iTunes both able to deliver video, but they're different platforms. One you think might be easily monetized, the other one less so. One might be more easy to get your media to spread, and the other one less so, and so on. And so you could look at the same with a printed book and the Kindle. So when you look at platforms, try to pick those that provide the least amount of friction to your audience. Think about your audience, where they're going to be consuming your media, what their habits are, what resources they have available to them. Are they strapped for cash or are they strapped for time? Because older audiences tend to have more money, but they have less time because they have families and so on, and they're ready to pay for convenience quite often. And these are the types of considerations you ought to factor in to your choice of platform. Now, don't feel that you have to solve all the problems or identify every platform in the first go. Go back round this sort of iterative loop to look at the story now. If you're looking at platforms which fit best with your audience, how is the story now, or how could you adapt the story or tell that story in a way that really sort of bakes in the platform so that it doesn't feel like an add-on or it's kind of been shoehorned into the platform in some way, but it's really integral. And just moving on now to the fourth consideration, the business model. I mean, let's not forget that it's very nice to be creating content, but we really can only do that if it's sustainable, if there's a source for financing this. So on this slide, I've identified 3 different types of business model: the free, the premium, and the freemium, which is a mix of the 2 above. And with the free model, the idea is that you're not looking for the audience to pay to consume the content, and this is because you've already got the money up front in some way. It could be that you've got very generous benefactors or patrons, and they don't want the money paid back. It could be that it's been crowdfunded, which effectively means you've received payment up front, so at least the costs are covered. Or it could be, here I've identified sponsorship. The sponsor wants your content to spread, and consequently the best way to get it to spread is to give it away. Now, with the premium model, you're asking audiences to pay to access your content, and this has typically been the way things sort of used to work. The problem nowadays, of course, is piracy, and the fact that it's very easy to copy content and then distribute it freely on the internet. Now, it's not a bad thing to expect to get paid, Of course not, and I'm encouraging people to try to, seek out new sources of revenue, and I'll go on to that in the freemium model. But my point here is that when you add a price to your content, it creates a barrier, and that will naturally limit the number of people it's going to limit the spread. It's going to limit the number of people to get access to that content. And this is why the freemium model is probably the optimum thing to try, where you have some free content which maximizes the spread, and then some premium content where you're actually getting some kind of revenue in. So I wanted to look in just a little bit more detail about this issue of getting paid, because it's something that bothers all of us actually. We live in a world where digital content is being copied, and even books are being scanned in. So even hard copies are being scanned in and then freely given away. And so what we ought to try to do is look at things that can't be copied, and where you've got things that can be copied, try to bundle it with something that can't. And the third option we have is to, even if something can be copied, maybe there's some friction there with the copying. Maybe it doesn't deliver an optimal kind of experience in the copying. So even though it's free, it's a little bit naff. And there are some people in your audience group that might pay for a better experience. And one way to look at this is basically the time and the money availability of members of your audience, because those people with very little time are prepared to pay for the convenience. And this slide here is looking at a way to approach getting money from your audience. Now, this idea of connect with fans plus reason to buy equals revenue is from a guy called Mike Masnick, who runs the Tech Dirt website. But I would encourage you to find out more about this from Ross Pruden, who's a filmmaker, and he's been writing about this sort of area, specifically from the perspective of filmmakers getting revenue for the things that they produce. And just to explain the diagram a little bit, in the middle we're saying that there's content which can be infinitely copied and distributed, and then as we move out from the centre, there are scarcer things, scarcer items that people might be more likely to pay money for because of their rarity. And I've broken things down into things and experience in this little Venn diagram. And what I'm saying is that there are some things which can be infinitely copied, but there are those people that will pay for convenience. They might pay for the immediacy of having it right now, rather than waiting a week or 2 weeks or whenever and getting it for free. Or even just when it comes to a download, they might, if they're sitting in front of a TV, they might press a button and buy it on video on demand or on iTunes, even though they know if they get off their arse and go to the laptop and run up the BitTime client, they can download it. They can download it for free. So what we should be doing is rethinking what it is that we're selling to audiences, and think about more than just the DVD. More than just the DVD. Try to offer a range of products, a range of things that audiences might buy that stretch from products like a DVD through to experiences, which might be a day with the filmmaker, or something like this. Now, I think that sometimes it can be a little bit misleading. If you're an independent filmmaker, who on earth is it that wants to spend time with you when you're completely unknown? But there might be. It depends exactly what you're offering in that day spent with you. And when you identify your audiences, you'll be able to find out. You'll be able to see what it is that you can offer that audience group, which more specifically meets their needs, that doesn't rely on you being famous. It's not the celebrity appeal, it's the knowledge that you can impart, or it could be something that you can do for a person that comes to see you. And it's not, I'm not advocating that everybody becomes speaker, public speakers or something, and goes around trying to make money on the lecture circuit. It's just trying to think about, with this project that I'm creating right now, what unique insights might I get maybe into the story. If you're running a documentary and you've spent several weeks or months with a particular kind of subculture, for example, or a particular person, there might be many things that are not covered in the documentary, in the video footage, that you could discuss with audiences. And it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily run live, real life kind of real world events. You could connect with people across the internet. You could charge for particular broadcasts across the internet and interact with fans in this way. So I'm just saying, be open-minded and really rack your brains about what it is that you can offer different audience segments. Just going back to Mike Masnick here from TechDirt, I've taken this from his site, and here you'll see that he's got all these different types of offers with lots of different price points. And the idea here is to really look at the audience and find out which of these price points will be optimum for somebody in the audience, and try to just really try to maximize your revenue. Now, having identified different things that you may or may not be able to sell, go back through this sort of process in the iterative way that I've been describing, and look at the platforms, the audience, and the story. And I keep using this phrase like baked in. Find those platforms that can support the things you'd like to sell in a much better way, rather than again feeling like it's a kind of bolt-on or it's a convoluted route and it doesn't really fit with the way that the audience wants to consume your media. And I think this is one reason why I'm saying you shouldn't try to get everything right from the start. That's why it's better to sort of take several passes each time, going through this 5 sort of considerations, these five steps, and each time improving improving the model. Now, the 5th and final thing is execution. This is all about timing. And what I'm saying here is there might be some platforms that, because you don't have the money to do the big platform right now, or because you have access to a particular person with certain skills available right now, there could be many reasons why you go to market with content on certain platforms before others. Now, one way to optimize this sort of decision-making process is to take something from this sort of small little equation here at the bottom about probability times impact. Normally you would use this to assess risk. So you might have a small probability of an earthquake happening, but the impact is quite large. Or there might be a large probability of, I don't know, someone stubbing their toe, but the impact is pretty small. And what I'm saying is you can look at your media and the way you expect to release that, unleash it onto the world, and say, right, with these platforms, what is the likelihood that I'm going to be able to deliver that content in the way that I would like, to the quality I like, in the time that I like, and what will be the impact of that? And by going through and weighing up asking these different questions and weighing up the different media, you should be able to come up with an execution plan that sees, for example, some small pieces of content going out initially and trying to build up audiences, and as your audience grows, then moving into the more, let's say, profitable platforms, the platforms that generate revenue. And you might find that getting that revenue, particularly if it means you have to go through some kind of aggregator or a third party, have got long lead times anyway, and there are other costs and nuisances that are associated with that. And that would be a good reason for kind of not putting it off. You might want to start it early, but in terms of the audience's experience of the story, why that might be further down the line. And the thing to do is, if you are able to go to market with small cost-effective pieces of media that's within your control, to then monitor what's happening and go back and look at this development model again. Go back through these 5 stages once you've implemented or started to implement your plan, and keep refining and keep honing and keep improving. And as I said once before, look at it as a journey. Look at it as an ongoing process, rather than something with an endpoint where you deliver the content, throw it over the wall and run off. Monitor, think, start small, test it with the audience, see what reaction you get back, and keep going through this cycle. And what you'll find is it becomes a virtuous cycle, that one success leads to another success, leads to another success. And it's a much better approach, I think, given the way that audiences are consuming multi-platform content right now, and the fact that, you know, most of the things that you would like to do, you can quite often do for free, and start engaging with people. Okay, so this is the final part 4 of 4, and what I wanted to do was provide an example of an independent filmmaker that's looking at these new business models. Now, Christian VIEL, very successful independent filmmaker, he's made many films. I know him best for his Recon trilogy. These films are really big in Asia, and what he's looking at now is Canadian superheroes. There's going to be a comic book, there are action figures, there's a web series, and this is the title of the Transmedia project, called Heroes of the North, and it's about Canadian superheroes battling with Nazi zombies. And it takes this alternative history of World War II, where the Germans reanimate the dead, and there are these zombots kind of running around causing havoc, and the heroes try to defend the country. If you look at Christian's sort of marketing materials, you'll find that he's got these character profiles, and he's got a very nicely laid out website where you can you see at the top frame now, you've got these calls to action, getting you to engage with the filmmakers through Facebook or through Twitter. And over on the right hand side is his store. Now, he's called it the Vault. And if you look, there's a range of different ways for the audience to part with their money, ranging from the kind of, let's say, the typical, and as we go up into price, the less typical. And I think that what's good about this is that, you know, it's a filmmaker who's come from the independent world, like myself, where you make a film, you get paid a minimum guarantee, and then you could move on and make your next film. And he's adapting to the new realities, really. If I could summarise this presentation, it's that the internet is really levelling the playing field for independent filmmakers, but we need to change our game. We need to raise our game. We need to have a direct relationship with the audience, so that we really own that valuable kind of connection between the people that want to consume and those who want to pay for the things that we create, and try to avoid other people getting in the way of that. And I think that Transmedia really plays to our strengths. I think it allows us a closer link to the audience. We have the full ownership quite often of the intellectual property, which means we're in charge of how the story plays out across different platforms and different media, which, as I said before, is difficult for these bigger companies, although they've got more money and more resources, actually coordinating that big company to deliver a consistency of story and across different audiences and platforms is difficult for them to do, and we can do that. And one thing that we really have as independent filmmakers is an authenticity. The content is coming directly from the producer to the audience, and I think some audiences respond to that, and we should use that to our advantage. And the final thing is, It doesn't have to be complicated. As I said before, I think a lot of transmedia, and there's not that much available really. I mean, we're still at the birth of this sort of cross-platform entertainment, where a lot of it is a little bit too complicated and asks too much of the audience. It's a bit like when when the producer says to you, I want a really original script. What he really means is, I want a script that I know will sell, which means it needs to be just slightly different to everything else that went before it. I'm not saying you need to bland down your projects. I'm just saying it doesn't need to be so off the wall and across 1,000 different platforms that nobody can relate to it anymore. So, if you look at what we're trying to do with the Lowlifes project, it's to take a novella, a web series and a blog. Very simple platforms that people understand, and to try to tell the story across those in a different, a unique way. And that's what I'm encouraging you guys to do. Just to finish, here are some credits. I want to thank Mike Masnick and Ross Pruden for the work they've done in looking at this, connecting with fans and providing reasons to buy. To Christian Val for allowing me to present information about his Heroes of the North, and for this person whose Photoshop Photoshop brushes I used to create the halftone image on the presentation. Things I'm working on now, if you want to go for more further reading, I'm developing a platform, a service called Transmedia Storyteller for independent content creators, intended to reduce the complexity and the problems of providing entertainment across multiple platforms. Lowlifes I've mentioned. I'm doing the marketing for an interactive game called Before You Close Your Eyes, which I encourage you to check out. And you should also check out Parasites, which is quite a complex, forward-looking project, which illustrates a lot of the concepts that I've been discussing here. And finally, this is me. You can contact me on Twitter, read the stuff I've written on my blog, and you can always email me. Thank you very much.